Collection of talks on Nokodemion's teaching from contact reports from 700s 57.
Contact Report 718.
Excuse me, but I do not think this should be brought up openly. Because on the one hand, I would like to say that everything is a private matter that does not belong in the public domain. And on the other hand, I am not vindictive, so I am not eager to mess up my ex. Unfortunately, the opposite is true of her, as well as her favorite son, both of whom have joined forces with antagonistic figures. On the one hand, as a result of their evil, unfounded hatred and primitive reasons for revenge, and on the other hand, because they are weak in terms of intellect, reason, and intelligentum, and are also uneducated and stupid. So I am vilified by both of them through lies and slanders on the internet, and in newspapers and magazines, whereby the stupid elements, who think they are big and clever, open the ways for them to reach the public worldwide with their lies and slanders, be it through radio, television, newspapers and magazines, or through any of their vituperations, which are otherwise spread by both of them and their pathologically stupid ones, and those who run with and listen to their lies and slanders. But when I speak of stupid people and their stupidity, then it is necessary that I explain once according to your Plearen teachings, as I learned them from your father Svath already in the 1940s, what stupidity basically is, and as what and how it must be defined. And this corresponds to something completely different from what our earthly psychologists, philosophers and scientists, etc. explain and claim, who have no idea and understanding in this respect and therefore do not know what stupidity is based on at all. However, many of those I have mentioned, namely psychologists, philosophers and scientists, etc., will reject this in their narrow-mindedness and know-it-all attitude, and will not acknowledge it, but will deny it and insult it, because they themselves are addicted to stupidity in their specialist knowledge. This is because they have no realization and no effective knowledge of what stupidity actually refers to, namely that it is simply based on the fact that in a certain field, such as psychology, philosophy, the sciences, etc., the necessary requirements of education, development, experiencing, and learning are insufficient or completely lacking in relation to the intellect, reason, and intelligentum. And the consequence of this is that no truthful fathoming of the psyche of a human being can take place, but misjudgments are made, causing immense damage and even evil mischief, up to and including murder, for which the misjudgment of psychology, philosophy, and the sciences, etc., would actually have to take responsibility. Stupidity is something different from how psychology and philosophy, etc., explain and judge it, because stupidity has nothing to do with the fact that human beings are subject to a disease of consciousness falsely called mental illness, a stupidity or limitation of consciousness falsely called spirit, or any form of inability to make decisions, to form opinions, to behave and to act, just as they are not subject to an inability to think, to train, to reflect. Even a human being addicted to stupidity is absolutely capable of turning to certain fields of knowledge, professions and activities and all kinds of development-related things, of learning everything imaginable in a good way, as well as of being creative and also of achieving great things in all kinds of fields, such as technology of all kinds of sciences, lifestyle, electronics, digital technology, natural history, biology, astronomy, etc., and so on, to achieve great things. As a rule, a human being addicted to stupidity is absolutely normal, in the sense of the human sane norm of consciousness, as a result of which he or she is as a rule normal in terms of consciousness wrongly called mentally normal. This is just how the general human opinion imagines it with regard to a normal relationship concerning what is normal. Correct and usual according to the human normal state of consciousness is erroneously called state of mind. In this way, the term normal assumes that the function of consciousness erroneously called mental function of the human being corresponds to a healthy function, and thus is not subject to any abnormal damage, which would completely impair a conscious and clear use of consciousness and further development of consciousness. The term normal or normality is used and applied by the human beings of Earth ambiguously and quite naturally, but incomprehensibly, for this term is one that is so confused and ambiguous with regard to normal or normality that disputes not infrequently arise over it. The very question of whether a human being with a disability of consciousness, wrongly called mental handicap, is normal or not, is viewed and judged differently by different human beings. So on the one hand, the opinion can be that such a disability is not normal, while on the other hand, other opinions amount to a disorder, illness, or something else, because the concept of normal is interpreted very differently as a result of different ways of thinking, views, and understanding. Thus, it can be argued that a disability is not normal because being normal is considered a biological norm, while on the other hand, a disability is considered completely normal because it is life-related or occurs only in relatively small numbers, etc. Depending on the human beings and their way of looking at and understanding things, the assessment therefore differs. Thus, on the one hand, the opinion can be held that a disability is completely normal because it can correspond to a natural form of existence, while on the other hand, for a person who himself has a disability, this belongs to his personal normality, and he is also of this opinion. This explanation clearly shows that there is not only one definition of normal and normality, but also different ones, because the term normal can be interpreted in completely different ways and according to the corresponding opinion. What is related to stupidity with regard to the normal? The norm has nothing to do with doubting the sanity of human beings, for with regard to stupidity, which is what is being spoken of, in what has been said and in what follows, the normality. The norm, that is to say the normal being of human consciousness is wrongly called spirit, is not attacked and not doubted. With regard to stupidity as a whole, it is also to be said that a human being can be addicted specifically to a certain thing, as well as generally to anything and everything, whereby this knows no limits in any case, because contrary to the professional claims of psychology and various sciences, etc., this does not show any impairment of consciousness, and also has nothing to do with the fact that IQ would be impaired by this. This corresponds to complete nonsense, because the intelligentum cannot be tested and evaluated in any way, but solely and exclusively nothing other than the processed, learned, and memorized knowledge and the associated combination moment of the human being, which is generally called intelligence. This intelligence, it must be repeatedly explained, corresponds only to a learned and memory-stored knowledge, which, however, has absolutely nothing to do with the intellect, and thus also nothing to do with intelligentum or being intelligent. Intelligentum and intelligence have no connection whatsoever and correspond to completely different values, but this is absolutely unknown as a result of the ignorance in this respect, in the very faulty earthly psychology teachings, psychology studies, and consequently in psychology knowledge as a whole. And this has resulted for a very long time in intelligence being equated with intellect, and intelligentum with being intelligent. Intelligence, it must be explained once again, corresponds only to a learned and memory-stored knowledge, a knowledge that is called school knowledge, general knowledge, professional knowledge, factual knowledge, departmental knowledge, mission knowledge, activity knowledge and milieu knowledge, obligation knowledge as well as sphere of activity knowledge, vocation knowledge, commitment knowledge, work sphere knowledge, position knowledge and métier knowledge, etc., and is thus broadly encompassing. This, however, has in no way anything to do with intelligentum, that is to say being intelligent, because intelligence corresponds solely to the knowledge and combination moment and the knowledge memory of human beings, as well as that through these certain knowledge values are brought together, or the resulting connections are perceived and named, but cannot be evaluated, and thus cannot be comprehended, because it is only a matter of knowledge information. Something completely different from intelligence or intelligence value, which is measured as IQ, or the value of knowledge and the moment of combination, is the so-called intelligentum, or being intelligent. This is because they embody the ability of human beings to think abstractly through understanding and reason, and to derive purposeful action from this. Consequently, intelligentum or being intelligent is not only a certain knowledge in relation to certain things and values that are expressed, as is the case with intelligence, but intelligentum or being intelligent is founded as the actual factor of the high value of logic or consistency in relation to the development of understanding and reason. And if intelligence is also always to be mentioned, practically as an inevitable consequence, then this factor is mentioned as the third value, no more and no less, simply because it is a storehouse of knowledge in addition to the development of understanding and reason and all the resulting high values. In contrast to intelligence is intelligentum or being intelligent through understanding and reason, which is an abstract ability to think and reason with a purposeful understanding and reasoning, intelligent thinking and cognition. And it is only through this intelligence that the formation of ideas and the processing of ideas, as well as actions in accordance with understanding and reason, and corresponding modes of behavior, etc., are made possible. And this alone without intelligence, which only forms the role of the collector and storehouse of knowledge, and has no capacity whatsoever for understanding and reason, and thus also no energy and power, as well as no influence on the development of an activity of thought, action, and behavior. An extremely high intelligence, that is to say, an extremely great knowledge in relation to a general knowledge or any form of professional or specialist knowledge, etc., does not in any way mean that the human being would also be highly developed in relation to his intellect, that is to say, his intelligentum, that is to say, his being intelligent. There is no high intelligence quotient that could be addressed as an effective value, except in relation to the stored knowledge, which, however, corresponds to no more than a memory value that can be retrieved and reproduced without any action. In the process, neither existential anxiety nor social isolation or emotional problems can occur, because intelligence as a pure store of knowledge is absolutely actionless and does not move anything out of itself. A computer process can serve as a comparison to this. When a search window is opened and a search question is entered, after which an answer window simply opens and the answer for the question is listed in writing in it, without any further and own activity taking place. In this process, no emotions are emitted, and therefore also no short or lasting dissatisfaction with regard to the question, but the aim of the question or the answer is simply given on the screen without emotion or activity. But this also leaves the effect of the answer to the person asking the question, so that he or she has to come to terms with, understand, and implement the value of the answer according to his or her own ability. And this arises in this way precisely because intelligence is not the same as intelligentum or being intelligent, which achieves a high degree of education through every conscious learning and forms the mind-reason accumulation of knowledge, wisdom. In the process, all knowledge is then also transported into intelligence, but only as pure knowledge, which is stored and can be reproduced as such, but cannot be utilized and thus neither implemented nor exploited. The use, implementation, and utilization of all knowledge, ideas, developments and plans, etc., can only take place through the intellect and reason or through their predetermined functions, whereby these values cannot be measured in the way that is practiced with regard to the senseless and downright moronic intelligence quotient. By means of such a quotient, IQ scores, an IQ scale, are supposedly used to determine the extent to which human beings are gifted and so on. Such an insane scale is, for example, the following, which is actually an insult to every human being who is rationally normal and thus not consciously impaired. These imbecilic psychological evaluations have fundamentally nothing to do with the abilities and capacities in relation to the intellect and reason of human beings, but they are imbecilically simply related to the knowledge of intelligence, which is arranged absolutely under every use of abstract thinking. Reasoning, that is to say, the reason is that it is only through understanding and reason that knowledge and insight can be gained, and it is only the results of these that lead to a fine, sharp, and trained intellect or intelligentum or being intelligent. The fact is that stupidity in the human beings concerned appears as a lack of intellect, reason, and intelligentum, which also results in a lack of talent in the intellectual field. This is contrary to the sciences and psychology, which claim that neither intellect, reason, nor intelligentum are affected by stupidity. And since stupidity basically corresponds to nothing other than an underdevelopment or a non-development of understanding, reason and intelligentum to a certain extent in relation to a certain thing, or several of them or in general, the whole thing is therefore very much a disadvantageous fact of understanding, reason and intelligentum. This then brings itself to bear as stupidity, which means, quite simply explained, that things and actions are done, behaviors are carried out, views and opinions are held, speeches are made, ideals are pursued, unreal stories of fantasy and lies are believed, and real reality and its truth are disregarded, etc., and thereby careless and uncontrollable mistakes are made which bring harm in some way. And all such thinking and acting, all such behavior, speech and opinions, as well as every belief of this kind, is precisely called stupidity, and this because learning with regard to controlling thoughts and feelings, as well as perception and recognition with regard to this, is impaired to the point of impossibility, and therefore it cannot be determined what corresponds to correctness or falsity. Hopes and desires or any false inspirations and imagined sensations also come into play, triggering wrong aspects of movements and ways of looking at things. And this is exactly what is being talked about in all the following explanations, in which especially the stupidity regarding the religious delusion of faith is in the foreground, which can only arise through the non-learning and non-development of the factor of perception of the real reality and its truth. And this delusion, which is far removed from all reality and truth and has since time immemorial brought discord, unfreedom, dissension, hatred and discontent to earth humans, is the all-embracing and most important factor in all the mischief that has been rampant in and over earth humans since time immemorial as a malignant delusion. This is because religious delusion disregards and tramples on the reality of creation and its laws and commandments corresponding to recommendations. In fact, however, the creation of universal consciousness is absolutely real, and thus also not bound up in a religious delusion of faith, as is the case with every religion and sect with regard to their imaginary and thus imagined and fantasized deity. The real creation, which is recognizable in the existence of the entire universe, of every celestial body and every planet, etc., and thus also in relation to the earth and its nature, fauna and flora, for every reasonable human being going through life with open eyes and senses, requires no religious or other delusional belief, but only the perception of its reality and its truth. This is because creation universal consciousness manifests itself recognizably in its truthful reality and its truth itself, as a visible, tangible, palpable universe with all its stars, nebulae, galaxies, planets, and nature with all its fauna and flora. The reason for this religious and sectarian delusion is founded in the fact that it has been hammered into the human beings for thousands of years through the indoctrination of delusional gurus, priests, cult leaders, and many other religious sectarian faith catchers through lies and deceit. This also results in a bondage to human beings and their lies, deceit, and slander, which are usually followed by foolish actions. These kinds of human beings live in ignorance and are weak existences in relation to a certain area, a thing, or also in general. And they have to struggle with their insufficient intelligentum, which they try to make up for by a smarmy or attacking, but also by an ingratiating, seductive, educated seeming, and many other kinds of behavior. As a rule, they do this by taking refuge in a delusion and occupying themselves privately or through a professional education with something or other, through which they can then pretend to be well-read and educated and believe that the fellow human beings with whom they surround themselves in their near and far surroundings are blind, stupid, and dumb enough to believe their false educatedness and take it at face value. And this is also connected, on the one hand, to not taking their fellow human beings seriously, but on the other hand also to hold them down, to pester them, and to take advantage of them in order to, paradoxically, indulge in and satisfy their own delusions of grandeur, but also to cowardly cover up their own lack of self-esteem and their very own personal rottenness, and to present themselves to the outside world as powerful, controlling, and domineering. The whole of the human being's stupidity corresponds to a dimension of stupidity that is emphasized in such a way that it inevitably becomes recognizable to a human being gifted with understanding, reason, and intelligence, as a result of which the stupid person cannot conceal his or her lack of consciousness, which the stupid person, however, is unable to realize because he or she mistakenly believes himself or herself to be educated and clever. It is therefore not without reason that it is said that there are also the stupid who cheat their way through life, and thus get far with the likewise stupid, because the latter are too stupid to recognize and understand the stupidity of the stupid. This is why very appropriate proverbs have also been invented, such as half the world belongs to the stupid, or the stupidest man may find the penny, but he does not see the gold piece next to it, and so on. In a narrower sense, stupidity also refers to the lack of ability to draw appropriate conclusions from perceptions and to learn intellectually intelligently. This deficiency is partly based on ignorance of all the necessary facts required to form a judgment, which the stupid human being, firstly, does not know a priori in his ignorance, and secondly, he is incapable of gaining real knowledge through an effective perception of reality and its truth. As a result, he is dependent on what he can absorb and pass on unthinkingly through his weak intellect, his lack of reason and intelligentum, because he is incapable of forming his own opinion through clear and tangible thoughts and reflections. This is precisely because the stupid human being in every respect cannot recognize any real perception of reality and its truth, and also cannot experience it, and consequently cannot gather any experience, because logical thinking is not accessible to him purely with his intellect, reason, and intelligentum. Stupidity is therefore due to a deficient intellect as well as a lack of reason and intelligentum, although these factors could be built up if the stupid human being in question would make an effort to do so. Stupidity is, after all, as a rule, if it is not a matter of congenital damage to the consciousness that does not allow for clear thinking of one's own, a factor that is created by the human beings themselves and is therefore not congenital. Understanding, reason, intelligentum, knowledge, and wisdom do not correspond in any way to a birth gift, for all these values must be laboriously learned and worked out by the human being himself from the ground up and thus from birth. This learning usually takes place through the upbringing and teachings of parents, siblings, relatives, and fellow human beings in the immediate and wider environment, as well as through the teaching staff of schools and vocational schools, and personal self-education and self-education, etc., whereby the learning human being, depending on his or her own will, makes more or less effort to learn and thereby acquires knowledge and wisdom, and from this also understanding, reason, and intelligentum. This is contrary to the stupid assertions of ignorant psychologists, philosophers, and other know-it-alls, who on the one hand deny that understanding, reason, and intelligentum are learnable and can be further developed, but on the other hand also neither know the very far-reaching spiritual doctrine in terms of knowledge, nor can they understand and judge the human psyche. In contrast to the lack of judgment and understanding of all the far-reaching values in this respect, they have neither an effective idea of the whole, nor an empathy with regard to the human world of thoughts, feelings, and psychology. Consequently, they cannot comprehend anything in this respect either. So these experts also cannot understand that the whole of stupidity or cleverness takes place solely through the efforts and interest of the individual human being, is learned, constantly expanded throughout life, and is aligned and expanded or neglected according to one's own interests, and that this varies from person to person as much as their opinions do. Today, understanding, Reason and intelligentum can be more appropriately compared to what distinguishes human beings from the sector of mechanics, and especially from electronic technology. Still, because at least at the present time, at the beginning of the 21st century, the third millennium, it is still superior to the entire development in this respect. And this is indeed still the case, even though billions of human beings have already become dependent on and addicted to the whole variety of mechanical and electronic technology, as for example with regard to poking around on smartphones or mobile phones with touchscreens and additional functions such as GPS, and the possibility of installing apps on them. And the fact that, partly as a result of this, millions and billions of human beings have become incapable of verbal communication with their peers and of interpersonal relationships, and have also become effectively effeminate creatures who can no longer do any physical work, who can no longer muster any initiative for their own thoughts, ideas, opinions, and actions, is only the beginning of the fact that an enormous number of these human beings are not only becoming increasingly stupid, lacking in understanding, reason, and intelligence, but are also becoming increasingly incapable of learning, and are effectively slowly but surely becoming stupid. All these human beings are also losing all capacity for imagination, as well as the healthy power of conception, imagination, and ingenuity with regard to valuable progress of every kind and form, etc. But they also lack the ability to think abstractly, as well as sensitivity and deeper sensibility, empathy, instinct, compassion, and the tactfulness of life. These human beings also lack good connecting qualities towards peace, freedom, justice, and righteousness, towards nature, its fauna and flora, and above all towards their fellow human beings. They also no longer show any recognizable measure of originality, creativity, and humor, but only a fanatical behavior with regard to various sports, which, however, due to their own incompetence and cowardice, they do not perform themselves, but let others do so, whom they cheer frenetically for their victory, or shout at them with shame and disgrace when they lose and perform badly. Basically, it can be said that stupid human beings, nowadays mainly juveniles, but also many children, although older adults are also becoming increasingly stupid themselves, not only lack the ability to perceive clearly and recognize the truth, but also the necessary connection with nature and its fauna and flora. Consequently, it can be seen and recognized in them that they do not understand anything about life and every correct way of living, as well as about personal development in every necessary respect, are far removed from it, and consequently also do not make any effort to perceive the effectiveness of reality and its truth. So they also do not perceive that the atmosphere and the climate have been destroyed by much more, and continue to be destroyed irresponsibly than is officially known through the public media. However, they are so poor in their mentality and behavior, as well as in their thoughts and feelings, that they cannot think their way into reality and the truth of life with their inferior and false sensibility, and cannot cope with their life, which is characterized by stupidity, so that they finally decay as life failures completely in terms of thoughts, feelings, and psychology, and finally put an end to their own lives. This, while they show no consideration, helpfulness, or tolerance towards their fellow human beings, nature and its fauna and flora, the climate or the planet Earth itself, and show only indifference and harm towards everything. The whole mentality and behavior of the majority of the human beings on Earth corresponds to a formula for lack of understanding, reason, and intelligence in the highest degree, and everything in this respect reveals the roaring stupidity of these human beings, as well as the fact that they are addicted to a religious delusion of faith, which subliminally incites them to a behavior of domination and power, and urges, and often even forces them to be arrogant towards other religious believers, and those who think differently. And this fact, which prevails subconsciously and unconsciously for the believers in the whole world of religious belief, forces them on every wanted or unwanted occasion to harbor, on the one hand, an enmity and domination towards those who believe and think differently, which is usually also accompanied, under certain circumstances, by violence and bloody revenge, as well as murder. On the other hand, the whole of the manifold evil, which is buried deep in the innermost character being, constantly lurking insidiously in order to be able to burst forth and rage at every possible opportunity, is not fought and not dissolved, because it is simply disregarded and suppressed by the religious sectarian delusion of faith and the delusion of wanting to be better than the others. Thus, it is given that all the malignant degenerations lurking in the deepest character being, which have 1,000 different forms, are a constant threat to the human being arising from it. And these innermost evil, malicious, mean, ugly, insidious and deceitful attitudes are, if they break through to the outside through any thought-feeling psychic movements, which often needs very little, as when, proverbially speaking, a louse creeps over the human being's liver, dangerous, life-threatening, and correspond to a malignancy or a malignancy which corresponds to an affective rule, which has the characteristics of a disease syndrome. So then, when the innermost degenerations in the deepest character break through to the outside, the possibility arises of a dangerous excitement, which normally degenerates into verbal malignities or into physical violence. And such outbursts occur for all kinds of reasons, whether it is an insult or a fisticuff, a quarrel, war, hunger, pain, or anything else, because through some minor, or also through serious thought-feeling psychic movements, the malignancy lurking insidiously in the deepest innermost character being breaks through to the outside. And when it breaks out, it is expressed verbally in an attacking and evil manner, or it degenerates into the worst kind of violence. So if any agitation arises, whether from thoughtless or attacking words, quarrel, war, hunger, pain, or anything else, then the malignancy lurking insidiously deep in the innermost character breaks through and becomes outwardly verbally blasphemous and attacking, or in the worst way with malignant hatred, with revenge and retaliation and with evil physical violence, up to frenzy and murder, manslaughter, torture, mass murder, rape and massacre, etc., whereby no limits are set in this respect. If the facts stated so far, which correspond to the real reality and truth, are taken as a basis by the earthlings who pretend to be experts in psychology and psychiatry, and believe that they have eaten their psychological and psychiatric wisdom with shovel diggers, then they have understood nothing of the whole of psychology and psychiatry and have no idea whatsoever of the whole of this reality and truth, let alone even a hint of knowledge. This is because through their academic studies they only study hypotheticals or assumptions and presumptions, but not the effectively real facts that correspond to reality and truth, as these are conveyed by the teaching of truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of life, about which these specialists are absolutely ignorant. If, however, they were to become knowledgeable of the teaching which deals with all conceivable facts concerning the existence and life of human beings, and teaches all that which is not taught in any college or university, however important, then they would become real specialists. And if the majority of human beings on earth, who are dozing off in religious delusion and consequently also in stupidity, would also learn this teaching consciously, willingly and with interest, then humanity would progress very quickly in its inner development, and would also not have any destructive effects on nature, its fauna and flora, waters, seas, forests, floodplains and meadows, the atmosphere, the climate, and on the planet itself. All the terrible destructions and ruination, as well as the annihilation and extinction, as this happens through the machinations of the overflowing earth humans with regard to nature and its fauna and flora, are not only related to the climate, but they are so manifold that it is impossible for me to list everything, because this would fill an entire book. But the fact is that the entire planet, its nature, the entire plant and animal world, as well as the insect, amphibian, reptile, fish and bird world, as well as all other life on Earth, which also includes the human beings, is already tremendously poisoned, and will continue to be poisoned, so that at the end of the second decade of the third millennium, there is effectively nothing left that is not more or less affected by all kinds of toxins. And this is so along with all the other evils that have been causing mischief for decades, like the whole of the catastrophic in relation to climate change, which is degenerating into a climate crash. As Svath already said, and I got to many media worldwide with my predictions in the 1940s and 1950s, but was ridiculed for it, as I have been again and again since 1975 up to the present day, if it was even mentioned at all. So it is not just climate change, because the whole of nature with its fauna and flora has been suffering for a long time and continues to be harassed, as have the fresh waters, oceans, and all their creatures, in addition to mankind, which is itself responsible for all destruction, annihilation, and extinction. And this is also the case with regard to the dissolution of the permafrost, whereby mountains collapse or become a great danger through demolition, whereby the atmosphere is also affected by methane gases being released, and everything will become much worse than the responsible, narrow-minded scientists are still falsely claiming at the present time. The entire reality of the present conditions of the planet Earth, of nature, and of the entire fauna and flora, etc., is on the one hand quite obviously not recognized and misunderstood by the responsible sciences, while on the other hand, however, also deliberately false results of the acquired knowledge are disseminated to the public. This is also the case with regard to official, Secret Service, military, and air traffic disclosure lists concerning observed unknown flying objects or UFOs worldwide, because in total only about 10% have been disclosed to the public to date. This would be the case if human beings would begin to think and reflect in an effectively rational and intelligent way, and find the reality and truth of life and all existence, and would also become clear and aware of their very far-reaching responsibility. They would also no longer have a ruinous, destructive, and self-deluding effect on their own personal consciousness, and equally no longer have a damaging effect on their own total organism, which includes the thought-feeling psychic world, and also the entire material body. All this, however, is neglected and nullified by the stupidity of the individual human being, and thus also by the majority of humanity, because the individual does not consciously turn to correct thinking, and does not make sufficient effort to build up his intellect, his reason, and his intelligentum, as well as his general knowledge and wisdom. On the whole, he does not pay attention to all the necessities connected with this, whereby the religious delusion of faith particularly prevents him from doing so. The latter indoctrinates him into believing that as a human being he should not think for himself, should not form his own opinion, and should not act according to his own decisions, but that he must and may only do according to God's will, which on the one hand is dictated to him by his delusion, and on the other, that he only has to follow what religious and sect gurus, religious bigwigs, priests, clergymen, preachers, and other unclergymen indoctrinate him with, but from which he can hardly, or not at all, free himself by following the whole religious believing nonsense unthinkingly and obediently. And the fact is that every religious belief creates hatred, discord, death, wars, murder, destruction, and ruin, also today and tomorrow, as it has been since time immemorial. And today this hatred, especially religion-related, is getting out of hand again, and will lead to renewed mischief in the future, not only between Christians and Muslims, but also between Christians and Jews, with neo-Nazis in particular being and continuing to be the driving forces, as well as so-called normal Christians who, through indoctrination by neo-Nazis and Reich Germans, are becoming haters of Jews, just as Jews and Muslims, on the other hand, are becoming haters of Christians and haters of Germany. And in doing so, all of these haters will insult their opponents, that is to say the Christians, the Jews, and Muslims, and the Muslims and Jews, the Christians, as bad human beings, and in their hatred will give satisfaction by murder and manslaughter, as has been the custom since time immemorial. And this will happen as it has always done, out of sheer idiocy, out of imbecility and nonsensical old and new hatred, which arises out of stupid racism and religious delusion, and divides human beings into good and bad, because religious delusion has pretended this since time immemorial, although the opposite is mendaciously preached. And this is so even though there is no good or bad human being, but only human beings who have good or bad character traits which they express and which are objected to or praised by other human beings. To think with reason. Rationality and intelligentum is not possible for any religiously delusional human being, because if he has fallen prey to a religious delusion of faith, then this prevents him from thinking neutrally and independently of faith, because religious faith holds him captive and makes it impossible for him to think even a single thought that would be without the influence of faith. And in this, it is the rule that the human being who is afflicted by a delusion of faith that dominates him and is dominated by it, which is inevitably the case with every believer in religion, sect, or any other kind of faith, does not, however, realize it. And this happens because the delusional faith works completely meanly unconsciously, and in this respect suppresses and completely switches off the necessary intellect, as well as reason and intelligentum in every believing human being, whereby these values have just remained unnoticed in the specific formation and development of intellect, reason, and intelligentum, and have therefore also atrophied. Therefore, it can also not be recognized and understood, because it is completely illogical, because illogic does not occur in the whole of creation and in all of its created existences, that if there were effectively a God or a creator God, there would be no God. Creator God, as the various religions and sects claim, whereby each individual religion and sect claims its own God and also names him differently. He would not be so stupid and imbecilic that he would create various religions, sects, and faiths, and despite the diversity of languages, would allow himself to be named differently than with a uniform name. It would be logical alone that only one religion with only one denomination would exist, which, moreover, would be oriented towards a single doctrine, which alone would be oriented towards the effectively recognizable, visible, and tangible reality and its truth, which can be comprehended by reason, and intelligentum. This alone would result in clear recognition, understanding, and knowledge, as well as an equally clear comprehension of all visible existence in nature, fauna, flora, and in the creation-given universe, and all their reality and existential truth, and this uniformly and undoubtedly as an incontrovertible correspondence with reality. Such a faith would be oriented and recognizable for every life form in such a way that the whole could be consciously grasped, understood, implemented, and effectively utilized. However, such a religion and belief system prescribed by a God does not exist, has never existed, and will also never exist. Every religious delusion of any kind is defended absolutely vehemently in every case, one way or another, when it is brought into the field in any way. And this happens because every religious or other delusion of faith works underground in such a way that it eliminates everything that corresponds to a rational, and intelligent thought. In this way, the delusion of faith is superior to every clear, rational, and intelligent thought, and this is because the delusion of faith has a mean, subterranean, and unconsciously compelling effect on the believing human being and holds him captive, as a result of which he cannot himself ascertain it in any way, which is why he defends his delusion. He cannot fathom this, because with his unclear, unneutral delusion he cannot come to terms with reality and truth, precisely because it is bound up with his faith. Consequently, there is not a single human being who believes in religion and whose intellect, reason, and intelligentum would be above making thoughts and reflections about the effective real reality and its truth in a completely neutral and faith-free way, in order to also perceive the effective reality and its truth with reason, intellect, and intelligentum, to be able to understand and comprehend it. No religiously believing human being is capable of this, even if he has enjoyed a good school education, a higher education or university education, and has earned a doctorate or professorial title, because the deepest-seated delusion of faith prevents any healthy, free, neutral as well as reality, and truth-moderate perception and understanding. Consequently, the only correct, true, and real of reality and its truth cannot be recognized and accepted in any way. Every religious, sectarian, or other belief prevents this through the forcibly acting delusion, which suppresses and stifles all understanding and every hint of reason and intelligentum, as a result of which the human being cannot attain understanding, reason, and intelligentum, and therefore continues to go through life in stupidity. Yet this term stupidity, as explained by the Pleiaren scribes and linguists, which I once asked for and which I have written down here, today means something quite different from what today's end product stupidity says. The original word from the Old German was tuomino and meant undignified, but in the course of time, this term was quaffed by the language changes to the abbreviation taum, and further to tum, twum and tumb, and then to tump, and from this again to stumpf, dumpf, and dumb, which finally gave rise to the dumbheit in use today. This term stupidity, whose primordial origin meant tuomino, that is to say undignified, was early on understood by the form tumb as dull, and then as dullness, through the changes in language, and was increasingly given special meanings. This gave rise to a word value that could be expressed by a series of words of the same or similar meaning, these being related in meaning and therefore in a particular context, in relation to the greater or lesser degree of the absence of understanding, reason, and intelligentum. These word values have expanded over time, as has also the original term tuomino, which is used today as stupidity. However, the meanings that have emerged from the original term since time immemorial, and which are still expanding today, and will certainly do so in the future, encompass a whole range of meanings, such as staid, indifferent, blindly believing, simple-minded, guileless, superficial, incomprehensible, unconcerned, backwoods, naive, senseless, limited, crazy, confused, stupid, dim-witted, moronic, stupid, uncomprehending, and underexposed. And further, the following meanings are also in circulation, such as inane, foolish, unreliable, clueless, stupid, empty-headed, dumbed down, nonsensical, without sense, futile endeavor, unrighteous, insincere, unimaginative, stultified, galloping spoof, standing on the sidelines, inadequate, gullible and unthinking, etc. Well, the fact is that only a human being who is free from religion, sectarianism, or other beliefs is able to think, consider, judge, and communicate in a healthy, clear, and neutral way in relation to real reality and its truth in every righteous, good, and progressive, as well as logical or consistent and neutral way for his or her high-quality self-development. As for the stupidity that accompanies religious faith, which, however, also occurs among those of other faiths than religion and sects, this stupidity is more or less always associated with a domineering touch. And this stupidity, which is undoubtedly the case when the inner and outer nature of human beings expresses domination, power, and a desire to be more than others, creates malice, enmity, degeneration of power, and Gewalt, whereby these factors arise just as inevitably from faith as the delusion of faith itself. Religious faith does not simply remain such for itself, but, as soon as it is accepted, it develops a compelling violence that leads to delusion, which has such an encroaching effect on the consciousness of human beings that their thought-feeling world very quickly becomes so clouded and infatuated that they immediately fall prey to a reality-truth blindness, and thus to delusion of faith. And if this happens, then the human being is no longer able to free himself from it, and falls prey to the fear that he would be punished by a god, etc., for giving up his faith. And this in addition to the fact that he is constantly pestered subliminally, and without noticing it, by his delusion of faith, so that under all circumstances he cannot detach himself from it, and free himself from it. Every small or great stupidity creates in human beings a domineering or power-seeking many-sided behavior, and this has the property of making itself recognizable to the outside world through one or more domineering attitudes and behavior patterns. This habitus in relation to leadership in an army, in any people, in a party, in a grouping, in politics or in the family, as well as in a government, religion, or sect, leads to uncompromisingness and to stubbornly following the rules, as well as to dictatorship-like or even real dictatorship. As a result, regulations, self-importance and rules, as well as paragraphs, ordinances and laws, etc., are enforced without restraint, bossily, and without regard for losses. Many human beings who are only weakly aware of their self-education in terms of understanding, reason and intelligentum, and have only halfway or not at all acquired self-education and general education, and therefore also go through life poor in understanding, reason and intelligentum, as a rule fall prey to a religious or sectarian delusion of faith and become dependent on it in every conceivable respect, or even become slaves to the God preachers who misinform them. The stupid, and that is the bulk of earthly humanity, do not concern themselves with learning reality and its truth, just as they also do not concern themselves with self and self-evolution in order to really become themselves. This is not done by a stupid human being who has not educated himself in terms of intellect, reason, and intelligentum, as well as in terms of knowledge, wisdom, and general education. And this includes many of the upper and top elites who exercise their primitive might in higher and higher places and harass not only their subordinates, but also the people whom they should not lead, but guide in righteousness and true humanity. But the majority of the people, in their stupidity, are in bondage to the stupid of the elites and acclaim them in their high and highest positions, who know how to elevate themselves as powerful over the people and direct them according to their will. The majority of the stupid people of humanity are therefore attached to and in bondage to those stupid people who, as powerful people of the upper and highest leadership elites, determine the fates of their stupid people in bondage to them, whereby they also muzzle the few righteous people, who, of course, also exist in the elites, and strive for true and good governmental righteousness for the people, suppress them, and do not accept their efforts. And this is very easy for them because they are always the majority in all elite positions, and thus in the superiority. And the fact that they cheat the people through and run secret governmental machinations, about which the people are not informed, and in addition mendaciously claim that democracy prevails because the stupid people are in bondage to the elites and are allowed to vote for them with strong political influence, is not realized by the stupid majority of the people, and indeed not by any people around the world. Unfortunately, among all the states on Earth, only Switzerland is an exception in this respect, which effectively has a democratic form of government. And even if it is only a semi-democracy, there is still a higher and real form of democracy through which the people can determine a great deal and not simply the government, but of which, unfortunately, it must also be said that in this various rivets are wrongly active, and, with regard to the EU dictatorship, blue-eyed, and moreover, stupid. And such elements can be found in various parties, which are also represented in the government, like those elements and parts of the people who fantasize a good future in the European Union dictatorship. A dictatorship, with which ignorant lunatics and dimwits flirt as simple fools and consciencelessly want to betray and sell their own homeland to a dictatorship, ruled by dictators and dictatoresses who, if it were for their personal benefit, would consciencelessly strangle their own mother and their own children. A human being who has not fallen prey to stupidity stands upright and firm in life with both feet of his own, is content, peaceful, joyful and humorous, righteous and just, but which he could only attain because he has thus protected himself from stupidity by beginning to learn a certain time after his birth, and has created for himself a steadily growing and ever-expanding intellect, as in the same way also a clear reason and an intelligentum, which place him far outside the majority of all stupid people. Such a human being, who is also aware of his fellow human beings, of nature and its fauna and flora, and who does all that is necessary, which is personally possible for him, for their welfare and treatment, consequently does not simply pass them by carelessly and indifferently, or anything else. Such a human being also never strives for domination, for might and leadership, but is always only advising, helping, instructing, guiding and leading the way according to his own good behavior, modestly and caringly. Stupid human beings can be defined as poor in their lack of imagination, for their lack of imagination, Their lack of ideas and their inability to think abstractly cause them to sink into insensibility, as well as into coldness of thought and feeling, instinctlessness, indifference, tactlessness, and effective inability to live. A human being who, as a result of his failure to learn intellect, reason, and intelligentum, is addicted to stupidity, is uncreative, humorless, and unoriginal, just as he is unable to empathize with other human beings in thought and feeling due to his lack of sensitivity, and is consequently pitiless, inconsiderate, and intolerant towards them. On the other hand, however, a stupid human being, be he stupid in a small, minor, or major way, is prone to fanaticism, obedience, and excessive enthusiasm with regard to religion, sectarianism, politics, and also sports practiced by others, as has already been mentioned. But stupid human beings are also degenerate in thought-feeling with regard to idolizing and exalting persons, especially believers in religions and sects who worship, adore, and hail their deities, saints, and gurus of all kinds. But there are also the stupid ones who hail and exalt others for their achievements and deeds, but who are themselves completely incapable of achieving anything worth mentioning, as has already been said. But there are also the stupid ones who adore dictators, politicians, kings and emperors, singers and actors to the point of self-sacrifice, and allow themselves to be killed for them and also for their fanaticism and delusion of faith. In repetition, it must be said once again that stupidity is not innate and thus not genetically acquired at birth, for the way in which it is created lies with the human being himself, because stupidity works everywhere and comes to the fore in every human being who, through the upbringing of his parents, siblings, grandparents, fellow human beings, and through the various schools, and also through his very own self-education, does not endeavor to develop his own intellect, his reason, and his intelligentum. And the fact that the majority of Earth humans, which also includes the majority of the upper and highest leadership elites of the nations, with very few exceptions, acts irresponsibly in this way and learns nothing or only little of understanding, reason, and intelligentum, is paid for by all Earth humans at a very high price, because the entire Earth humans are being educated by the upper and highest elites of the governments and their vassals, as well as by the religious fanaticism of the religions and sects and their gurus and other leaderships indoctrinating the believing people with religious imbecility, leading them into wars, uprisings, terror, assassinations, ruin, and destruction, exploiting them, sexually abusing them, and in many ways restricting their peace as well as their freedom and fulfillment of life. For human beings there are numerous causes why they act stupidly, whereby these result from actions, deeds, behavior, carelessness, unkindness, hatred, falsehood, greed, as well as thought, feeling, psychic movements, and many other factors. So, in every case, stupid actions are, without exception, purely self-initiated, self-made, and self-executed stupidities, for the execution and making of which some personal elements are brought up, which, strictly speaking, are lacking in intellect, unreasonable, and unintelligent, and therefore form the corresponding causes which inevitably lead to stupid actions. So in this respect too, understanding, reason, and intelligentum come into effect, or rather the opposite, at every moment when a stupid action is committed. A stupid situation is created, a stupid speech is made, a belief or anything else is used or done that is not thought through and handled with reason and intelligentum. The fact is, as already explained, that human beings must acquire the use of understanding, reason, and intelligentum themselves from birth and cannot inherit their logical use, and if they act stupidly, it is because they only learn more or less laxly, and thus do not acquire sufficient understanding, reason, and intelligentum. So it is also completely wrong to assume that in the course of hominization an innate part of understanding, reason, and intelligentum has developed in human beings, but that this would simply not be sufficient, because there is a certain innate lack of intelligentum from the ground up and above. All the lack of imagination is important in order to awaken intelligentum. And the confused doctrine that various, partly also gender-bound talents are not sufficiently available to the necessary extent, and consequently cannot be acted upon in a purposeful and situation-appropriate manner, is nothing other than ridiculous, because fundamentally all factors are determined solely by the conscious learning of the human beings themselves. Basically, he alone determines his own learning efforts and the level of his intellect, his reason, and his intelligentum. And this also answers the question of the measure of the maximum and optimal human intelligentum, as well as its limits, because these lie in the conscious possible maximum and optimal thinking, reasoning, researching and fathoming of real reality and its truth, whereby the maximum and optimal as well as their limits are determined by the human being himself, by the extent to which he consciously, and through learning endeavors to advance his thought-feeling psyche mind, reasoning, intelligentum conception, conditioned searching, researching and fathoming. And this must be done consciously and unswervingly from early childhood and adolescence and also in adulthood, as well as during the whole of life. And this must be done first of all through early and later education and training, in order to learn through it, and also in adolescence through personal self-education, which must be continued and then maintained throughout life. Thus, the human being alone determines the maximum and optimum, as well as the limits and the measure in relation to his personal learning of intellect, reason, and intelligentum. The fact is that human beings must be able to enjoy a clear, clean, just education free from religions, sects, philosophies, and worldviews. If, however, such factors of faith are introduced into education, then the development of understanding, reason, and intelligentum is not promoted, but completely suppressed or malformed. And this happens through false parents, grandparents, schools, faith communities, religions, sects, secret co-parents as well as friends, traditions, philosophies, media, literature, and worldly institutions. Furthermore, scientific institutions, private, social, and military academies should also be mentioned, as well as all kinds of secret cult institutions, colleges, organizations, and universities, etc., which indoctrinate their followers, but also children and juveniles, members, pupils, learners, and students with false teachings or purely hypothetical nonsense far from any real reality and truth. Everywhere there is a lack of real, truthful enlightenment, instruction, and education, so that the necessary educational task is not fulfilled. But, on the contrary, the human beings are led astray by nonsensical and unrealistic false teachings. And this happens because in every conceivable respect, no method of education and no teaching institution does justice to the effectively necessary teaching of the real truthful conduct of life, the reason for which is that the necessary knowledge is lacking everywhere. The public media also play an important role in this, for instead of them taking up the correct teaching of the conduct of life in an instructive manner and spreading it in an instructive manner, as it should be learned by human beings according to reality and its truth, only murder and manslaughter, politics, religion and sectarianism, the military, war, advertising, crime, and terrorism are reported on, which often has the result that human beings are thereby animated and become addicted to the propagated things, etc., emulate them and become copycats. And this happens because, due to all the false teachings, human beings are incapable of creating understanding, reason, and intelligentum, and are consequently incapable of grasping even simple, let alone very complex, correlations and foreseeing long-term consequences of their actions and behavior. This, however, has nothing to do with an ability in terms of an imaginative faculty, as psychology erroneously misleads us that imagination is the crucial point, that it is only through imagination that thinking ahead and the development of cognition and learning, etc., are possible. Basically, this psychology assertion corresponds to sheer idiocy, because every thinking ahead and development of cognition and learning is founded in a correspondingly acquired measure of knowledge and its essence, wisdom. Through these values, understanding, reason, and intelligentum are developed, and through these, in turn, the ability to combine specially recognized reality truthful facts, through which probability calculations, or an ability to calculate in advance, can be created, and thus foresight can be brought about. If, however, the necessary knowledge of the real psychological connections is lacking, as is the case on a large scale with the earthly experts in psychology, although they think that they have swallowed psychology wisdom en masse from gigantic automatic feeders, then even an ignorant monkey knows that nothing clever in the way of explanations and teachings can come out of it. Contrary to the stupid assertions and false teachings of earthly psychology, etc., human beings do not lack the imagination to imagine the consequences of their stupid actions, but effectively because, as a result of wrong upbringing and wrong teaching, etc., they do not develop their intellect, reason, and intelligentum to a sufficient degree. And in this consequence, the emotions and motivations also come into play, which are created by thoughts and feelings and which, seen against intellect, reason, and intelligentum, are not only brought to bear inadequately over a longer period of time, but effectively cause the human being to act stupidly. And this happens because, due to the lack of his decisive abilities of intellect, reason, and intelligence, he can neither move in attention, nor can he master and control himself. This is due to the fact that he is not fully awake, present and not up to date in terms of consciousness, as a result of which he is inevitably unconsciously subject to various cognitive deceptions, which often cause him to make stupid wrong decisions, and he suffers damage. Particularly in difficult problems of any kind, but especially in the conduct of life, the human being needs the clarity of his entire cognitive ability, or the totality of all processes that are connected with the perception and recognition of reality and its truth. However, this cognitive totality can only function if a clear mind, a valuable reason, and the decisive intelligentum are present and can be brought to bear. But if this is not the case, because these high values have not been learned, have not been worked out, or have been crippled and bewitched by false education and false teachings, understanding, reason, and intelligentum are subject to hair-raising results. First and foremost, there is a religious delusion of faith, which also goes hand in hand with the idolization of gurus, sect leaders, sages, and other spiritualities, as well as with the delusion of spiritual beings, angels, of saints, and of a devil and his companions, who, in the sweat of their brow, fire the poor soul furnace in hell with coal, so that the poor souls who have lived fallibly in life can be roasted in agony, whereby this imbecility haunts many delusional minds. Secondly, there is the lust for power and domination, which is also accompanied by a desire for prestige and immodesty, as everything is also accompanied by a desire to show oneself off, to present oneself as a very important person, but is also a very incompetent person. Thirdly, possessiveness comes to the fore in terms of possessions, money, and wealth. Finally, it is to be said that the training of consciousness and the resulting knowledge and the following wisdom must take place solely according to reality and its incontrovertible truth, and there must be no religious or other delusional influences. Only absolute reality leads to the perception and realization of real reality and truth, and through this to inner balance, contentment, and freedom, to peace and righteousness. On the contrary, all religious and sectarian faith leads to the urge for some nonsensical fantasies, and inevitably to illusions, and to bondage and delusion of faith, which altogether cause fears of faith, inner dissatisfaction, lack of freedom, hatred and vindictiveness, as well as retaliation and deeply impaired judgment and many other evils and disadvantages. Every delusion of faith, like stupidity, produces a lack of judgment, as well as an inertia and sluggishness of apprehension with regard to real reality and its absolute truth. Religious faith and stupidity correspond to a disease of consciousness, which also creates a serious slowness with regard to the ability to combine the available facts. As a result, also the effective real reality and its incontrovertible truth are not perceived, not recognized, not understood, and consequently cannot be implemented and comprehended. In addition, through faith and stupidity, further causes influence the function of understanding, reason and intelligentum, and limit their energy and power, whereby these factors lie in the area of the emotions created and stored through thoughts and feelings. In the case of religiously believing and stupid human beings, these influence their overall cognitive processes at every opportunity, whereby first and foremost a rejection of perception with regard to reality and truth is forced, but on an emotional basis also a dependence and effective bondage to the delusion of faith arises, which as a rule cannot be countered with any strength with regard to understanding, reason, and intelligentum. Consequently, there is also emotional resistance against any realities and insights, as a result of which religious, sectarian, or other religionists such as gurus, priests, clergy, and cult leaders, etc., have a very easy game with their indoctrinations and manipulations with stupid and thus also faith-prone human beings, in order to convince them of all delusion and unrealistic reality and truth alienation. The total cognitive processes are unfortunately only used in an extremely unvaluable way by the majority of the total earthly population, because this majority of earthly humanity is not accessible to intellect, reason, and intelligentum, and this is so, on the one hand, due to the lack of necessary efforts with regard to conscious learning, and on the other hand, because there is a complete ignorance with regard to the corresponding teaching, as this is given by the teaching of truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of life. In fact, only a small percentage, that is to say, a minority, of the entire Earth humans and their rulers, as the upper and highest elites, are capable of effectively using the total cognitive processes and their values consciously, correctly, and successfully. And this cognitively good, correct, and successful working on itself and itself in logical, that is to say, and this minority, which is working on itself cognitively well, correctly, and successfully, and which is building up its own intellect, reason, and intelligentum in a logical manner, and which must inevitably turn away from the stupid majority, and cannot struggle with them, is unfortunately being harassed by those who are ruled by stupidity, and cannot implement and achieve the good and correct things that would be of need and benefit for the whole people. And because stupidity dominates the majority of humanity through the delusion of faith, caused by religions, philosophies, and worldviews, any logical progress is prevented, as well as any wise coping with real facts with regard to the perception of the unchangeable reality and its incontrovertible and non-manipulable truth. Every act of profound stupidity and religious as well as sectarian delusion of faith strangles every hint of understanding, reason, and intelligentum in the delusional human being, before also only the possibility is offered of even directly reaching an open ear of the delusional human being. Nothing can be changed or altered about this, unless the human being, possessed by and in bondage to the delusion of faith, himself comes across some reality truth factor in a compelling way that frightens him and throws him completely off his path of faith. And only through this, or in some similar way, does it raise doubts in him about his religious or sectarian delusion, and thereby cause him to search for effective reality and its incontrovertible truth, in order to then consciously turn to it in a learning manner when he has perceived and found it. And this is the solved riddle of the minority of those human beings who, far from any religious delusion, lead a healthy and normal life in worldly existence, and are concerned with a good, healthy, and correct way of life, as well as with personal mental development. It is this minority of life-affirming human beings who are in themselves contented, joyful, glad, peaceful, righteous, and just, as they themselves have consciously and willingly learnt to be by their own impulse and interest and by personal knowledge, or by instructions of the time-honored teaching of truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of life, as this was created and taught by the herald Nokodemion ages ago, but which is also given today and is taught and disseminated as spiritual teaching, and in many books and small writings by the Figu. If the majority of the human beings on earth are observed with regard to their efforts to think, then it is frighteningly evident that they have a hellish fear of their own thinking, and of their own thoughts and feelings, which is much greater and more powerful than anything evil and sinister that exists on earth. even one's own death and the possible loss of one's own. Fortune is much less frightening to the majority of humanity than thinking that they could sin and be punished by God if they were to deviate unintentionally from what He, God, supposedly demands of them. So the majority of the human beings on earth consider their thinking and thoughts to be revolutionary, and therefore subversive and destructive to their way of life and well-being. For each individual person of the majority of earthly human beings, personal thinking and precisely with it his world of thoughts is a terrible threat as a result of his delusion of faith, because thinking itself knows no mercy and, regardless of any threat, simply forms thoughts which under certain circumstances can be completely different from what they are intended to be. So thoughts know neither mercy nor privilege because they correspond to habits and act like institutions that function according to certain rules, as a result of which thoughts can arise that, as I said, are not wanted, but are anarchistic, reckless, heretical, lawless, and indifferent to all the imaginary wisdom and love of an imaginary God. Seen in this way, the human being of Earth sees himself as a tiny, weak grain in the face of the stupid imaginary laws and commandments of the imaginary God, which can do nothing but cover himself in profound silence, so as not to harbor a false thought against the imaginary demands of his equally imaginary God. Therefore, in his fear of the alleged threats of his imaginary God, he shrouds himself in silence so as not to cause him to punish him. So he lags behind effective reality and its truth with his thinking and simply lets them be as they are without caring about them. In this way he holds himself up proudly, remains unmoved by reality and truth, and imagines himself to be good, clever, and even a creation himself. In fact, stupidity is also involved in all this, but it inevitably means that the human being cannot bring himself under control because, as a result of his lack of education with regard to his intellect, his reason, and his intelligentum, he cannot bring himself to think and reflect, and therefore also to make the correct decision. Consequently, he becomes a slave to those who are able to think little and establish themselves as the upper or highest elite of politics, governments, and the economy, but first and foremost of religions and sects. Thinking is great, free and fast, and it is the non plus ultra or nec plus ultra, the no more and no beyond of the human beings of earth, by which he means that he has reached the highest of his glory. Therefore, the simple and stupid human being of the majority of the human beings of the earth does it in the same way as the leading specimens of the upper and highest government elites, as well as the religionists, gurus, priests, parsons, preachers, and sect chiefs, as well as all dictators, many doctors, professors, money bosses, other big VIP specimens and big mouths, etc., who simply banish every thought and every thought far into the driest desert. The elites and the rich, as a result of their religious faith and their stupidity, do not want to think out of fear because they believe that thoughts could bring them harm, as is also the case with the normal stupid people of the majority of humanity. All of them, however, all the stupid ones of the majority of humanity, let their thinking atrophy more and more for fear of losing their goods and their fortune. And since they are also afraid of their evil morals becoming public knowledge, they are stressed by this, as well as by the fact that all their possessions could be endangered by war, crime, and terror, and they could become poorer than a desert mouse. This also makes them envious, because they suspect that the next person will steal everything from them, and that they cannot do anything about it. And this again leads to prejudices that the next person could be a thief and a cheat, etc. But the fact that all this also comes about through thinking and dark thoughts is overlooked, and the whole thing is simply buried in the shadowy realm of oblivion. However, those human beings who belong to the minority of the non-grow of the stupid and who are not addicted to a religious delusion of faith want to prevent their thinking and thoughts by lies, slander, missionary indoctrination, and aggressive attempts at persuasion. And in this respect, especially the religious delusionists and the religionists, gurus and cult leaders of all kinds and types are in the forefront, stupidly and verbally or violently disregarding the free thinking of those who want nothing to do with the stupidity of religious delusion. For them, real and effective reality and its truth are a catastrophe, because reality and truth represent a might that, in the long run, can destroy every religious delusion if the delusionists find the way to reality truth. But this wants and is to be prevented by the delusion of faith under all circumstances, whereby in this respect all religionists of all religions, and sects in their soul launching pads around the world, vehemently insult reality and truth in the same way, and try with lies and deceit to hold back their religious delusionists of their religion or sect. And this is practiced in every alleged place of worship, such as in Christianity in every church, in Islam in every mosque, masjid, that is to say masjid, nice place of prostration, in Buddhism in every pagoda addendum, pinyin, tav, stupa, thupa, stupa, tope, chedi, churton, dagoba, pagoda and paya, etc. In Judaism in every synagogue, that is to say Bet Knesset, house of assembly, house of prayer and skola, and in Hinduism in every temple, mandira, house of a deity. And with this, I have once said what I actually wanted to clarify a long time ago, whereby to the whole that I have brought up in my monologue as a conclusion, the following sheet also fits exactly, which Acom Wolf beamed to me a long time ago.